Hi, my sweet friends, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. We're continuing reading today from The Adventures of Pinocchio. Excuse me. We're starting with Chapter 6. Pinocchio falls asleep with his feet on the brazier and wakes in the morning to find them burnt off. It was a wild and stormy winter's night. The thunder was tremendous and the lightning so vivid that the sky seemed on fire. A bitter, blusterous wind whistled angrily, and raising clouds of dust swept over the country, causing the trees to creak and groan as it passed. Pinocchio had a great fear of thunder, but hunger was stronger than fear. He therefore closed the house door and made a rush for the village, which he reached in 100 bounds, with his tongue hanging out and panting for breath like a dog after game. But he found it all dark and deserted. The shops were closed, the windows shut, and there was not so much as a dog in the street. It seemed the land of the dead. Pinocchio, urged by desperation and hunger, laid hold of the bell of a house and began to peal it with all his might, saying to himself, "That will bring somebody." And so it did. A little old man appeared at a window with a nightcap on his head and called to him angrily, "What do you want at such an hour?" "Will you be kind enough to give me a little bread?" "Wait there, I will be back directly," said the little old man, thinking he had to do with one of those rascally boys who amuse themselves at night by ringing the house bells to rouse respectable people who are sleeping quietly. After half a minute, the window was again opened, and the voice of the same little old man shouted to Pinocchio, "Come underneath and hold out your cap." Pinocchio pulled off his cap, but just as he held it out, an enormous basin of water was poured down on him, watering him from head to foot as if he had been a pot of dried-up geraniums. He returned home like a wet chicken, quite exhausted with fatigue and hunger, and having no longer strength to stand, he sat down and rested his damp and muddy feet on a brazier full of burning embers. And then he fell asleep. And while he slept, his feet, which were wooden, took fire, and little by little they burnt away and became cinders. Pinocchio continued to sleep and to snore as if his feet belonged to someone else. At last, about daybreak, he awoke because someone was knocking at the door. "Who is there?" he asked, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "It is I," answered a voice, and the voice was Geppetto's voice. Chapter 7. Geppetto returns home, makes the puppet new feet, and gives him the breakfast that the poor man had brought for himself. Poor Pinocchio, whose eyes were still half shut from sleep, had not as yet discovered that his feet were burnt off. The moment, therefore, that he heard his father's voice, he slipped off his stool to run and open the door, but after stumbling 2 or 3 times, he fell his whole length on the floor, and the noise he made in falling was as if a sack of wooden ladles had been thrown from a 5th story. "Open the door!" shouted Geppetto from the street. "Dear Papa, I cannot," answered the puppet, crying and rolling about on the ground. "Why cannot you?" "Because my feet have been eaten." "And who has eaten your feet?" "The cat," said Pinocchio, seeing the cat, who was amusing herself by making some shaving stance with her forepaws. "Open the door, I tell you," repeated Geppetto. "If you don't, when I get into the house, you shall have the cat from me." "I cannot stand up, believe me. Oh, poor me, poor me. I shall have to walk on my knees for the rest of my life." Geppetto, believing that all this lamentation was only another of the puppet's tricks, thought of a means of putting an end to it, and climbing up the wall, he got in at the window. He was very angry, and at first he did nothing but scold, but when he saw his Pinocchio lying on the ground, and really without feet, he was quite overcome. He took him in his arms and began to kiss and caress him and to say 1,000 endearing things to him. And as the big tears ran down his cheeks, he said, sobbing, "My little Pinocchio, how did you manage to burn your feet?" "I don't know, Papa, but believe me, it has been an infernal night that I shall remember as long as I live. It thundered and lightened, and I was very hungry, and then the talking cricket said to me, 'It serves you right, you have been wicked and you deserve it.' And I said to him, 'Take care, cricket.' And he said, 'You are a puppet and you have a wooden head.' And I threw the handle of a hammer at him and he died, but the fault was his, for I didn't wish to kill him. And the proof of it is that I put an earthenware saucer on a brazier of burning embers, but a chicken flew out and said, 'Adieu until we meet again, and many compliments to all at home.' And I got still more hungry, for which reason that little old man in a nightcap opening the window said to me, 'Come underneath and hold out your hat,' and poured a basin full of water on my head, because asking for a little bread isn't a disgrace, is it? And I returned home at once, and because I was always very hungry, I put my feet on the brazier to dry them, and then you returned, and I found they were burnt off, and I am always hungry, but I no longer have any feet." And poor Pinocchio began to cry and to roar so loudly that he was heard 5 miles off. Geppetto, who from all this jumbled account had only understood one thing, which was that the puppet was dying of hunger, drew from his pocket 3 pears, and giving them to him said, These 3 pears were intended for my breakfast, but I will give them to you willingly. Eat them, and I hope they will do you good. If you wish me to eat them, be kind enough to peel them for me. Peel them, said Geppetto, astonished. I should never have thought, my boy, that you were so dainty and fastidious. That is bad. In this world, we should accustom ourselves from childhood to like and to eat everything, for there is no saying to what we may be brought. There are so many chances. You are no doubt right, interrupted Pinocchio, but I will never eat fruit that has not been peeled. I cannot bear rind. So that good Geppetto fetched a knife and, arming himself with patience, peeled the 3 pears and put the rind on a corner of the table. Having eaten the first pear in 2 mouthfuls, Pinocchio was about to throw away the core, but Geppetto caught hold of his arm and said to him, Do not throw it away. In this world everything may be of use. But core I am determined I will not eat, shouted the puppet, turning upon him like a viper. Who knows? There are so many chances, repeated Geppetto without losing his temper. And so the 3 cores, instead of being thrown out of the window, were placed on the corner of the table together with the 3 rinds. Having eaten, or rather having devoured, the 3 pears, Pinocchio yawned tremendously, and then said in a fretful tone, I am as hungry as ever. But, my boy, I have nothing more to give you. Nothing? Really nothing? I have only the rind and the cores of the 3 pears. One must have patience, said Pinocchio. If there is nothing else, I will eat a rind. And he began to chew it. At first he made a wry face, but then one after another he quickly disposed of the rinds. And after the rinds, even the cores, and when he had eaten up everything, he clapped his hands on his sides in his satisfaction and said joyfully, Ah, now I feel comfortable. You see now, observed Geppetto, that I was right when I said to you that it did not do to accustom ourselves to be too particular or too dainty in our tastes. We can never know, my dear boy, what may happen to us. There are so many chances. Chapter 8. Geppetto makes Pinocchio new feet and sells his own coat to buy him a spelling book. No sooner had the puppet appeased his hunger than he began to cry and to grumble because he wanted a pair of new feet. But Geppetto, to punish him for his naughtiness, allowed him to cry and to despair for half the day. He then said to him, Why should I make you new feet? To enable you perhaps to escape again from home? I promise you, said the puppet, sobbing, that for the future I will be good. All boys, replied Geppetto, when they are bent upon obtaining something, say the same thing. I promise you that I will go to school and that I will study and earn a good character. All boys, when they are bent on obtaining something, repeat the same story. But I am not like other boys. I am better than all of them, and I always speak the truth. I promise you, Papa, that I will learn a trade and that I will be the consolation and staff of your old age. Geppetto, although he put on a severe face, had his eyes full of tears and his heart big with sorrow at seeing his poor Pinocchio in such a pitiable state. He did not say another word, but taking his tools and 2 small pieces of well-seasoned wood, he set to work with great diligence. In less than an hour the feet were finished, 2 little feet, swift, well-knit, and nervous. They might have been modeled by an artist of genius. Geppetto then said to the puppet, Shut your eyes and go to sleep. And Pinocchio shut his eyes and pretended to be asleep. And whilst he pretended to sleep, Geppetto, with a little glue which he had melted in an eggshell, fastened his feet in their place, and it was so well done that not even a trace could be seen of where they were joined. No sooner had the puppet discovered that he had feet than he jumped down from the table on which he was lying and began to spring and to cut 1,000 capers about the room, as if he had gone mad with the greatness of his delight. To reward you for what you have done for me, said Pinocchio to his father, I will go to school at once. Good boy. But to go to school I shall want some clothes. Geppetto, who was poor and who had not so much as a farthing in his pocket, then made him a little dress of flowered paper, a pair of shoes from the bark of a tree, and a cap of the crumb of bread. Pinocchio ran immediately to look at himself in a crock of water, and he was so pleased with his appearance that he said, strutting about like a peacock, I look quite like a gentleman. Yes, indeed, answered Geppetto, for bear in mind that it is not fine clothes that make the gentleman, but rather clean clothes. By the by, added the puppet, to go to school I am still in want. Indeed, I am without the best thing and the most important. And what is it? I have no spelling book. You are right, but what shall we do to get one? It is quite easy. We have only to go to the booksellers and buy it. And the money? I have got none. No more have I, added the good old man very sadly. And Pinocchio, although he was a very merry boy, became sad also, because poverty, when it is real poverty, is understood by everybody, even by boys. Well, patience, exclaimed Geppetto, all at once rising to his feet and putting on his old fustian coat, all patched and darned, he ran out of the house. He returned shortly, holding in his hand a spelling book for Pinocchio, but the old coat was gone. The poor man was in his shirt sleeves, and out of doors it was snowing. "And the coat, Papa?" "I have sold it." "Why did you sell it?" "Because I found it too hot." Pinocchio understood this answer in an instant, and unable to restrain the impulse of his good heart, he sprang up, and throwing his arm about Geppetto's neck, he began kissing him again and again. Chapter 9. Pinocchio sells his spelling book that he may go and see a puppet show. As soon as it had stopped snowing, Pinocchio set out for school with his fine spelling book under his arm. As he went along, he began to imagine 1,000 things in his little brain and to build 1,000 castles in the air, one more beautiful than the other. And talking to himself, he said, "Today at school I will learn to read at once. Then tomorrow I will begin to write, and the day after tomorrow to cipher. Then with my acquirements I will earn a great deal of money, and with the first money I have in my pocket I will immediately buy for my papa a beautiful new cloth coat. But what am I saying? Cloth indeed! It shall be all made of gold and silver, and it shall have diamond buttons. That poor man really deserves it, for to buy me books and have me taught, he has remained in his shirt sleeves, and in this cold. It is only fathers who are capable of such sacrifices." Whilst he was saying this with great emotion, he thought that he heard music in the distance that sounded like fifes and the beating of a big drum. Fi-fi-fi, fi-fi-fi, zum, 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 zum. He stopped and listened. The sounds came from the end of a cross street that took to a little village on the seashore. "What can that music be? What a pity that I have to go to school, or else—" And he remained irresolute. It was, however, necessary to come to a decision. Should he go to school, or should he go after the fifes? "Today I will go and hear the fifes, and tomorrow I will go to school," finally decided the young scapegrace, shrugging his shoulders. The more he ran, the nearer came the sounds of the fifes and the beating of the big drum. Fi-fi-fi, zum, 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 zum. At last he found himself in the middle of a square quite full of people, who were all crowding round a building made of wood and canvas and painted 1,000 colors. "What is that building?" asked Pinocchio, turning to a little boy who belonged to the place. "Read the placard. It is all written, and then you will know." "I would read it willingly, but it so happens that today I don't know how to read." "Bravo, blockhead! Then I will read it to you. The writing on that placard in those letters, red as fire, is Great Puppet Theater." "Has the play begun long?" "It is beginning now." "How much does it cost to go in?" "2d." Pinocchio, who was in a fever of curiosity, lost all control of himself, and without any shame he said to the little boy to whom he was talking, "Would you lend me 2d until tomorrow?" "I would lend them to you willingly," said the other, taking him off, "but it so happens that today I cannot give them to you." "I will sell you my jacket for 2d, the puppet said to him. What do you think that I could do with a jacket of flowered paper? If there was rain and it got wet, it would be impossible to get it off my back. "Will you buy my shoes?" "They would only be of use to light the fire." "How much will you give me for my cap?" "That would be a wonderful acquisition indeed, a cap of breadcrumb. There would be a risk of the mice coming to eat it whilst it was on my head." Pinocchio was on thorns. He was on the point of making another offer, but he had not the courage. He hesitated, felt irresolute and remorseful. At last he said, "Will you give me 2d for this new spelling book?" "I am a boy, and I don't buy from boys," replied his little interlocutor, who had much more sense than he had. "I will buy the spelling book for 2d, called out a hawker of old clothes who had been listening to the conversation. And the book was sold there and then. And to think that poor Geppetto had remained at home trembling with cold in his shirt sleeves, that he might buy his son a spelling book. Chapter 10. The puppets recognize their brother Pinocchio and receive him with delight, but at that moment their master Fire Eater makes his appearance. When Pinocchio came into the little puppet theater, an incident occurred that almost produced a revolution. I must tell you that the curtain was drawn up, and the play had already begun. On the stage, Harlequin and Punchinello were as usual quarreling with each other, and threatening every moment to come to blows. The audience, all attention, laughed uproariously as they listened to the bickerings of these two puppets, who gesticulated and abused each other so naturally that they might have been two reasonable beings and two persons of the world. All at once, Harlequin stopped short, and turning to the public, he pointed with his hand to someone far down in the pit, and exclaimed in a dramatic tone, "Gods of the firmament, do I dream or am I awake? But surely that is Pinocchio." "It is indeed Pinocchio," cried Punchinello. "It is indeed himself," screamed Miss Rose, peeping from behind the scenes. "It is Pinocchio, it is Pinocchio," shouted all the puppets in chorus, leaping from all sides onto the stage. "It is Pinocchio, it is our brother Pinocchio. Long live Pinocchio!" "Pinocchio, come up here to me," cried Harlequin, "and throw yourself into the arms of your wooden brothers." At this affectionate invitation, Pinocchio made a leap from the end of the pit into the reserved seats. Another leap landed him on the head of the leader of the orchestra, and he then sprang upon the stage. The embraces, the hugs, the friendly pinches, and the demonstrations of warm brotherly affection that Pinocchio received from the excited crowd of actors and actresses of the puppet dramatic company beat description. The sight was doubtless a moving one, but the public in the pit, finding that the play was stopped, became impatient and began to shout, "We will have the play! Go on with the play!" It was all breath thrown away. The puppets, instead of continuing the recital, redoubled their noise and outcries, and putting Pinocchio on their shoulders, they carried him in triumph before the footlights. At that moment, out came the showman. He was very big and so ugly that the sight of him was enough to frighten anyone. His beard was as black as ink and so long that it reached from his chin to the ground. I need only say that he trod upon it when he walked. His mouth was as big as an oven, and his eyes were like two lanterns of red glass with lights burning inside them. He carried a large whip made of snakes and foxes' tails twisted together, which he cracked constantly. At his unexpected appearance, there was a profound silence. No one dared to breathe. A fly might have been heard in the stillness. The poor puppets of both sexes trembled like so many leaves. "Why have you come to raise a disturbance in my theater?" asked the showman of Pinocchio in the gruff voice of a hobgoblin suffering from a severe cold in the head. "Believe me, honored sir, that it was not my fault." "That is enough. Tonight we will settle our accounts." As soon as the play was over, the showman went into the kitchen where a fine sheep preparing for his supper was turning slowly on the spit in front of the fire. As there was not enough wood to finish roasting and browning it, he called Harlequin and Punchinello and said to them, "Bring that puppet here. You will find him hanging on a nail. It seems to me that he is made of very dry wood, and I am sure that if he was thrown on the fire, he would make a beautiful blaze for the roast." At first, Harlequin and Punchinello hesitated, but appalled by a severe glance from their master, they obeyed. In a short time, they returned to the kitchen carrying poor Pinocchio, who was wriggling like an eel taken out of water and screaming desperately, "Papa, Papa, save me! I will not die! I will not die!" Chapter 11. Fire Eater sneezes and pardons Pinocchio, who then saves the life of his friend Harlequin. The showman Fire Eater, for that was his name, looked, I must say, a terrible man, especially with his black beard that covered his chest and legs like an apron. On this whole, however, he had not a bad heart. In proof of this, when he saw poor Pinocchio brought before him, struggling and screaming, "I will not die! I will not die!" he was quite moved and felt very sorry for him. He tried to hold out, but after a little while he could stand it no longer, and he sneezed violently. When he heard the sneeze, Harlequin, who up to that moment had been in the deepest affliction and bowed down like a weeping willow, became quite cheerful, and leaning toward Pinocchio, he whispered to him softly, "Good news, brother. The showman has sneezed, and that is a sign that he pities you, and consequently you are saved." For you must know that whilst most men, while they feel compassion for somebody, either weep or at least pretend to dry their eyes, Fire Eater, on the contrary, whenever he was really overcome, had the habit of sneezing. After he had sneezed, the showman, still acting the ruffian, shouted at Pinocchio, "Have done crying. Your lamentations have given me a pain in my stomach. I feel a spasm that almost... Etsy, etsy!" And he sneezed again twice. "Bless you," said Pinocchio. "Thank you. And your papa and your mamma, are they still alive?" asked Fire Eater. "Papa, yes. My mamma I have never known." "Who can say what a sorrow it would be for your poor old father if I was to have you thrown amongst those burning coals? Poor old man, I compassionate him. Achee, achee, achee!" And he sneezed again 3 times. "Bless you," said Pinocchio. "Thank you. All the same, some compassion is due to me, for as you see I have no more wood with which to finish roasting my mutton, and to tell you the truth, under the circumstances you would have been of great use to me. However, I have had pity on you, so I must have patience. Instead of you, I will burn under the spit one of the puppets belonging to my company. Ho there, gendarmes!" At this call, 2 wooden gendarmes immediately appeared. They were very long and very thin, and had on cocked hats and held unsheathed swords in their hand. The showman said to them in a hoarse voice, "Take Harlequin, bind him securely, and then throw him on the fire to burn. I am determined that my mutton shall be well roasted." Only imagine that poor Harlequin! His terror was so great that his legs bent under him, and he fell with his face on the ground. At this agonizing sight, Pinocchio, weeping bitterly, threw himself at the showman's feet, and bathing his long beard with his tears, he began to say in a supplicating voice, "Have pity, Sir Fire Eater." "Here there are no sirs," the showman answered severely. "Have pity, Sir Knight." "Here there are no knights." "Have pity, Commander." Here there are no commanders. Have pity, Excellence." Upon hearing himself called Excellence, the showman began to smile, and became at once kinder and more tractable. Turning to Pinocchio, he asked, "Well, what do you want from me?" "I implore you to pardon poor Harlequin." "For him there can be no pardon. As I have spared you, he must be put on the fire, for I am determined that my mutton shall be well roasted." "In that case," cried Pinocchio proudly, rising and throwing away his cap of breadcrumb, "in that case I know my duty. Come on, gendarmes, bind me and throw me amongst the flames. No, it is not just that poor Harlequin, my true friend, should die for me." These words, pronounced in a loud, heroic voice, made all the puppets who were present cry. Even the gendarmes, although they were made of wood, wept like two newly born lambs. Fire Eater at first remained as hard and unmoved as ice, but little by little he began to melt and to sneeze. And having sneezed 4 or 5 times, he opened his arms affectionately and said to Pinocchio, "You are a good, brave boy. Come here and give me a kiss." Pinocchio ran at once, and climbing like a squirrel up the showman's beard, he deposited a hearty kiss on the point of his nose. "Then the pardon is granted?" asked poor Harlequin in a faint voice that was scarcely audible. "The pardon is granted," answered Fire Eater. He then added, sighing and shaking his head, "I must have patience. Tonight I shall have to resign myself to eat the mutton half raw. But another time, woe to him who chances." At the news of the pardon, the puppets all ran to the stage, and having lighted the lamps and chandeliers as if for a full dress performance, they began to leap and to dance merrily. At dawn, they were still dancing. We'll stop there and start next time with Chapter 12. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.